Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be making the hair of Jinx from Arcane. It's quite a cool hairstyle, it has some nice features, and I think we'll be able to use StrandKit's new features to a very good use. So I have a little scalp mesh here, and I'll just include that in the descriptions as well if you just want to use this. Do it. So how do we start this off? So the latest StrandKit feature actually works with, let me get it here, and it is under the cards. We have a mesh to hair card system, and we also have a curve to braid system, right? So we can actually create braids in quite an easy way, and we can also just create the hairs with meshes in quite an easy way, right? So actually I think this should be mirrored like that. I think this should be on the left side of Jinx. So let's just start that off, right? Let's start defining the hair shape, and we've got like a line here for the hairs that go to the right side, and this all goes behind her ear and into her braid at the back there, right? So we can just completely make that. And then we have one system here, and we may split it up into 2 or 3 individual ones. We'll see, right? At least we need that nice shape. And here it goes to the left as well, right? So let's start off with that right side, okay? So we have a scalp mesh, and you can use that as well. And here all the hairs already go back in quite a nice manner, I would say. So we can just select, for example, this hair until, let's go into face select by pressing 3, and let's go until like here maybe. Then we can move it back, and let's move it back until we get this switch in like the loops in the edge flow, so it goes like this, and then here it suddenly goes like that. I don't want that, right? Because the hair should flow more like this. Okay, so I'm just going to, at first, maybe we shouldn't even do it to here, but just have it cleanly like this, and hold Control, and then you'll select the face where you want your selection to end with, right? So if you select this one, you hold Control and you select this one, it will select the shortest path to that face, which is very nice. So now we can just select the entire loop here. We can just continue, click, 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 and then hold Shift and just select this, you know. There may be a better way to do that, but I'm not sure. If you do know it, please comment it below, okay? So this, I'm just gonna duplicate this, Shift D, Escape P Selection, and right away, let's just rename this to hair left. It's the left side of the scalp, and let's just extrude this a little bit so we actually get this. Let me go back into front view. So we get this shape that all the way goes to the bottom, right? For now we have the shape until like here, like that, but we need it to go all the way to there. So we're just gonna extrude this a little bit in side view, like that. And we can just extrude this down more, rotate it a little bit, and later on we can just sculpt this to look better. For now, we don't have to worry too much about the shape of this and the way it looks, right? Something like this. And then it should go into the braids. And we can scale this in the Z direction by pressing SZ. And then we have a beautiful edge flow here. Nice. Then perhaps we can add a few more loops here, just as supporting loops. And then in sculpt mode, we can just press G and scale it up with F a little bit, and press Shift and just click, and it will smoothen out our scalp a little bit, right? Like that. And then you can always just move it out of your original scalp again, right? Something like that. And let's go into back view, Control numpad 1, that is, and let's make sure that this is all more aligned to that center as well. Okay, something like this. Like that. Hold Shift and just smoothen it out a few times. You can smoothen it out as much as you want. It works quite well. Something like that. And like this, okay? And it should be a little bit more rounded, I suppose, right? Just keep going back to your references. It should go out a little bit more. So we can do that as well. For example, by selecting this edge loop here, and then setting proportional editing mode enabled, and then we can just scale this up, scroll up a little bit, like this. So now it moves out a little bit more. And we can do the same for this, for example, just scale it up a little bit. And I will just go through some of these edge loops and do the same. And go back into sculpt mode. If something looks a little bit off like this, we can just sculpt that back into place, right? This is all about just getting that proper first start. And then we can just alt press or double click on this edge loop here and press SX and disable proportional editing first. SX, oh my god, 0. And let's select this one and move it a little bit to the right and press SX and scale it down a little bit. Just so this middle line is completely straight in the X direction, so we can actually use this to mirror later on. So how do we now convert this into hair? Well, let's first define the start, the root points of the hair very easily. So go into your data, hit plus and hit start and hit assign. There we go. And select this one, hit plus and hit assign. And now in StrandKit, we've got a mesh to hair card system, and this will be part of the full version of StrandKit. And this is also part of the hair card toolkit, right? Which is, if you're just working with cards, you don't need actual hair, fur or dynamics, and then you can just get the hair card version. It's a bit cheaper. So then we can actually just drag and drop that onto that system there. And there we go. Let's select our scalp object in the modifier panel, and it is already starting up a hair system. Let's just see how this looks. All right, we got some beautiful hairs, and let's just go to the shader editor while we are at it, and let's select the hair. You can see which shader is applied here to the hair material. Let's disable first layer for a second. We can see that we have a mesh card base, so let's add that here just so we can tweak it. Hair card main, hair mesh, what was it? Card base, that was the name, sorry about that. And then we can just change a little bit of the hue to get more to a blue color, right? We can just do that, why not? And maybe we need some more saturation, you can add that as well. But just do what you think is right. And the fun part here is, well, this is a stylized hair, right? So we can't really know how this hair looks. But we can also change, for example, with the StrandKit add-on, if I set this to be the correct location for my hair, which was, let's see, it was under my StrandKit. And then I can just open up my StrandKit hair card switcher. If I want, for example, some more kind of wavy hair, I can just set this to be, what hair card do we have now? I think it was maybe blonde. Oh, let's do let's do blonde. Let's do blonde, thickness 3, density 100. Material is going to be the base card mesh, and we can swap the textures. It will change slightly. Maybe we just do a thickness of 5 instead, or maybe even 10. Let's just see how it looks. All right, so everything changes a little bit. And let's just go into the modifier panel and right away start playing around with a bit of the card width as well. Right, you can see what happens if we widen this up and we get some more detail in the actual strands. There we go. That's looking fun. And maybe we want the loose hairs to be a little bit less crazy as well. We got loose hair section here. We can just set the offset strength to be a little bit closer to the actual hairs. There we go. That's looking better. Right, and we can, for example, also try a 2C wavy hair type, which is going to be a bit more wavy. Perhaps that is too much though, so let's try a 2B. And that is a bit wavy. I'm not sure if Jinx has wavy, a little bit of wavy hair, but we can always just change that later. Let's actually change this back to a thickness 5. I think I like that a tiny bit better. Alright, so this is looking quite decent. And if you want to change the density of the hairs, you can also start playing around with the quantity multiplier. And maybe we do 2. Is that too much? Yes, maybe 1 is fine. And I'm going to play around with the start point blur as well. You can see how that changes the start points of your hairs. Alright, and we can actually change this to be, let's say we want 1. And we can add a little bit of randomization for the start points as well. Let's see how that affects things. And then we can play around with the alignment here as well, right? So how much it aligns to our actual scalp. Maybe we do 0 for now. And let's add a few more light paths as well for the transparent path. So the dark values don't come in that much. Okay, so I think this is a fine starting point. So from here on forward, we can just add a mirror modifier in this mesh. And do we need a subdivision modifier? I'm gonna turn that off just so we don't work with any subdivisions, right? I think that is a better idea. So let's turn that off. And let's just add 1 to the hair quantity. And I'm gonna swap this back to a 1B straight. Maybe 1C straight. That's fine. So then I'm just gonna add a mirror modifier, mirror, and I'm gonna add it in front of the mesh to hair cards. And let's just make sure that the merging is enabled, and maybe we merge it a little bit more. Then before we continue, what I'm going to do is just set my world to be a sky texture, just because I want to see how it looks under proper lighting. I'm gonna increase my sun size a little bit. Let's elevate it slightly and let's rotate it so we get a little bit of lighting coming from some sides as well. And then let's go into the render tab, color management, lower the exposure a little bit maybe. Just so we have some more real lighting conditions going on, right? Something like that. And let's disable the film and enable transparency, just so we have it like this. That's looking like we have a bit better of an idea of what's going on, right? I'm gonna change my base card mesh to be a little bit less thick even, and maybe just gonna swap this to a 1A. Maybe let's see, 1B. That's looking better. And now for this front part, I'm just gonna extrude a mesh as well, right? So I'm just gonna, let's just extrude the mesh from our scalp here. Let's select, for example, this one until here. Shift D, escape P selection. And let's just hide this for a second. And let's extrude this up. And I'm gonna press SZ0, just so right here at the top we have more of a straighter kind of look there. And we can just, let's disable the X symmetry there. Let's move this to the side, and then we have a hard cut here to the bottom. Let's press A and Shift N to recalculate normals. And let's also delete the subdivision modifier, right? We got some nice straight lines here. And then it goes, I think it goes in front of the face a tiny little bit as well. So we're gonna do it like that. And then scale it up a little bit and extrude it some more like this. And then like that. Rotate it a tiny bit and scale it a little bit down. Maybe something like this already looks fine. And let's actually rotate this in the Z direction a little bit as well. Maybe a little bit in the, maybe a bit down. Yeah, something like this I think will be fine. Let's just play around with this look while we are starting. So let's re-enable our hair left. Let's select this starting point here. We name this to start, hit assign. And the end here, we name this end, hit assign, there we go, and then we just copy the modifier from that one there. Now, if something doesn't show up properly, make sure that you actually have a start and an endpoint assign, or that you just misclicked or you did something wrong. This should work, but we have a mirror modifier that we don't need. There we go. So this looks like some hair cards already. So let's decrease the quantity, maybe a bit, and let's add some start point blur. There we go. And for this one, let's just go into render view and see how this looks right from the start. So there's a lot of hair going on. So maybe we can just delete this back edge hair, delete. We get a little bit less hair. And let's also make sure that this connects properly at the start points, right? So let's go into solid view for a sec. Let's just move this up and frontal a bit more, because it does start from the very front. We just move this up and rotate this a little bit so it connects properly there at the base of our hairs, like this. Beautiful. And then we move this up a little bit, to the left a little bit. Let's see. We can even bevel it to get more of a sharp edge. I don't want to go too sharp though, because that's going to look weird, I suppose. And what we can do is actually scale this down, scale it down a little bit to get more of a point. That, and then we can even scale this down a little bit too. There we go. And let's see how this looks. All right, so we add a little bit more card resolution. There we go. And let's see. Want this to connect more to the front part of our head. There we go. And maybe we just move this down a little bit. This down a little bit too. And then we can even just move some things out to get more of a split in those hairs, right? So everything moves a little bit in random directions here, right? So just really start playing around with the way you shape your hair. That's always the fun part here, because it is fully procedural and you can just redo all changes or change your mesh in a beautiful way. Okay, maybe we change the width a little bit to be a bit lower hair card width. Something like that. And maybe we can even just turn down the clumping, right? So these endpoints, we don't need them to clump that much. Something like that, perhaps. And then we can just do the same thing. We can just duplicate, for example, one of these hair strands. Like that, and we can just move it back a little bit, for example, and scale it down a little bit, just to create some more depth in here, perhaps. Something like this. And what we can do even is just separate this part of the geometry into a new mesh, just so we have more control over the way this mesh is going to look, right? Something more like this, perhaps. So we have some more separation going on. We got some more beautiful kind of hair splits, right? And we can just control the layering here a little bit better, and even the rotation of the hair. We can just control that and make it look more organic in a way. We can move this down a little bit so it really layers better into the hair. And I think that already works a lot better, right? Maybe we move this a bit closer together, even like this. And we can even turn clumping on for the first one, for example, leave it off for the second one. Really just play around with it a little bit, right? And let's just duplicate this one more time, duplicate it, and let's just control the way this looks. Maybe this one goes a bit more inwards and down like this. Maybe it's a bit longer as well, so we see a smaller strand just sticking out from the bottom a little bit, like here. There we go. We scale it down a little bit. Beautifully, we can even change the width a little bit smaller, like that. We can even rotate this so it's more an inwards kind of shape, I suppose, like that. And maybe a bit more up though, something like this. But we enable clumping for this one as well, right? Just so we have a better kind of fall off point. So that's already looking interesting, right? Layering always makes things look quite cool, in my opinion at least. And when we do change this a tiny bit though, something like that, right? So let's just start off with this look, and maybe we just move this out a little bit more. This, and then we can move this out a bit more as well. You see, just play around with it a little bit, it's fun. Like this, maybe we rotate that a bit more though. So we see a bit more of the actual mesh geometry. There we go. So now for the split in the middle, what we can do is we can just scale up the second edge loop here. Is it this one? Let's go to solid view. Yes, so we can just scale up that second edge loop a little bit by just moving it up like that. And let's also move this one up a little bit like that. And then we can move that one up a little bit as well, and then make everything a little bit smoother like this. Right, beautiful. And let's up the resolution a little bit on those hairs as well. Right, so everything becomes a bit smoother, and maybe we add a tiny bit of a curl as well, because it can add a little bit of a nice feel. And maybe we just lower the frequency a little bit, so it just becomes a little bit more realistic and random. Maybe we add the mirror in front, so it actually doesn't mirror the curve pattern. So this is looking quite interesting, right? Let's go to sculpt mode and let's sculpt everything here away from the center, something like that. Beautiful. And let's just start this braid now, right? Because that is obviously probably the hardest part. But we can totally just dive into that with the StrandKit feature curve to braid mesh. So we can actually just add a new curve. We can just add a bezier. We can scale this down a little bit. Make sure to apply the scale though, and just drag and drop your curve to braid mesh first here. There we go. So it's going to be defined on your length of your spline. So if something looks weird, just play around with the overall thickness and the thickness correction as well. Right, you can add a little bit of thickness, and you can actually change the starting width and stuff as well. The strand thickness. Play around with that. Let's play around with the starting position as well. Braid start point position. There we go. And the start point scale as well. Something like this. And we can now let's just connect this to our sculpt object, at least the hair cap. There we go. And then we can start playing around. Let's just delete this modifier for a second. We can actually set this to our front part there. And then we can just start shaping our braid a bit more. So this goes down more like this maybe. And then this is fine. This can go more down, you know, just have some fun with it, you know. It's quite a long braid actually, something like that maybe. And let's re-enable it. Right, what I said, it is based on the length of your curve. So if you have a longer curve, it is going to thicken your braid, which is not always what you want. So just reduce the thickness correction a little bit. We can add more frequency in the braids like this, and then we can start playing around with the thickness correction a little bit as well. And maybe we add a little bit of strand thickness so it becomes thicker overall. And then we can change the width and the depth as well to align this in a proper way, pretty much. And what I'm gonna do now is just in object mode, I'm just gonna move the entire braid up a little bit so that everything becomes a bit closer to our scalp, right? Something like, well, like this maybe. Looks fine. Excuse me. And then we can actually turn this into a mesh, right? Before we do so, let's see, maybe we want some more profile resolution. Because this mesh is going to be used for the mesh to cards, obviously. Something maybe like this. Do we want to change something still in the settings? Maybe a bit of a... We can even subdivide this, you know? Subdivide your curve so you have another control point you can use to really shape this up. Then we can move this there maybe. And then we can change the overall thickness a little bit so everything becomes a bit cleaner and less thick. Something like that already looks pretty beautiful to me, right? So maybe we move this. Let's move the entire thing up a tiny bit like that. And what I'm gonna do now is just press object, convert mesh, right? So now we have a beautiful braid mesh, and I will usually do some final tweaks to sculpt this into the right place. Something like that. Starting point of that braid, it goes down a bit more maybe, so we should perhaps just move this a bit more down, something like this, right? You can still just sculpt this because now it's a beautiful mesh, right? Something like this. You can make it a bit more random if you want as well, just so it looks a bit less automated maybe, something like this. And the fun part here is that this geometry node setup already sets up your start and end points, which means technically that we just drag and drop this onto the mesh and it should already gather the start and end points. All we need to do is set the correct sculpt object to be hair cap. And there we go. So now it looks a bit weird, and that's because the width of these hair cards are way too much for the braids. So we just lower this to match way more with the braids. And the resolution is not right as well. So we have to up the resolution a little bit to match the resolution of the braid more. And then we can start playing around with the width a little bit more. So we can just stick to quite low width here. We can just see how this looks now instead. And we already start getting a nice braid shape. Perhaps we can get away with less width even. Something like that looks nice and organic maybe. And maybe we add a tiny bit of resolution. Go to 3 and add a tiny bit of roundness as well. Maybe 0.015 already works. Let's see how that picks up. Maybe not really. tiny bit more, maybe a little bit more width in the hair cards, so everything connects nicely. And maybe we even add the hair quantity modifier a bit more. No, let's not do that. Let's do 1. That was fine. And let's see. Let's just play around with the roundness a tiny bit. You can even go into minus values, that way you get a bit more kind of overlap in your hairs, it seems like. Could also work out nicely. But this is already a fun way to start this off, right? I'm going to up my bounces a tiny bit more. There we go. And we can still just sculpt this, you know, if we still like the shape, I'm just going to sculpt this to be a bit more like that. Still a nice organic shape. Beautiful. We can attach this to the scalp, excuse me, in a nice way. There we go. Maybe we have too much hair, so we can just crank this down to 1, which seems to fix more of that already. Transparent passes is at 32 right now. This already looks a lot better. And perhaps we need these loose hairs. We can actually just add a bit more resolution there as well, because they are quite long, of course, which is, you know, that's just the annoying part with these kind of long hair strips, is that we have a lot of resolution that's needed here. And we can just set the strength to be closer to the hairs. And if you want, you can change the quantity to be more. That will add more of a wilder kind of braid, right? The more you increase this, the more wild it's going to look, as well as the more strength you have in your offset, the more wild it's just going to look, as you can tell, right? So let's add a tiny bit, but not too much, something like this. An interesting looking braids, and we can absolutely just mirror this as well if we just want that to be mirrored for now, right? And make sure to set your origin point, all right, to the origin. There we go. We already have a nice hair system in place. It was quite an easy start. Let's not lie here. It was quite easy. So what I'm gonna do, what I will usually do, is just because we have 1 layer of hair right now here at the front, I will just add another layer at the back somewhere that blends it more together. So I'm just gonna move all of this a bit more together with the actual hair braids here, just so everything looks a bit more like it overlaps, something like this. And what we can do is go to rendered view, and if this is already looking better, and it does, all that I'm gonna do is add a little nice system for the back hair. So right here until there, I'm gonna duplicate it, separate it, and just extrude it straight down like this perhaps. Let's add an edge loop here, move it out a little bit. Let's move another edge loop out a little bit. And this one, inside view, we can just move it in a tiny bit. And I think that's already fine. And we can just scale this up a little bit, as well as this one. Just scale it up a little bit. This one too, maybe. And then we can just set our starting points here. Start, assign, we can hit plus, we can hit end. And then we can assign the endpoints, and then we can just copy the modifier of our hair cap here. Ctrl L, copy modifier. And let's make sure that we disable the mirror for now. And we normalize or flip the normals. And let's extrude this a little bit more down. There we go. This one can go more down as well, so the hairs actually show up a little bit better. There we go. Beautiful. And let's see how that looks. Nice. Let's go into the cards. We can just have less quantity and make these wider. Hair card width. We can really just widen everything here a little bit. Quite a lot maybe. Let's see. Maybe that's too much. We need to match the rest of the hairs, of course. Something like that. And then in skill mode, we can just try to make everything here match a little bit more in terms of how the hair blends together. And so let's go to the other hairstyle here. We can just sculpt this in a little bit as well, like that, just so everything is going to be blending beautifully, right, as it should. Something like this. Move the endpoints a bit more out, like that maybe. Beautiful. And this as well. And then everything starts to blend in a bit nicer. And I think the scalp has too many hairs right now. So we can just decrease this multiplier to 2. Let's go there. And then we can just move everything out a little bit more once again. Or maybe we need to move everything a bit more to the inner parts. What I'm going to do is for this part here, the lower part that's supposed to merge everything together, I'm just going to move the entire edge up to maybe start there. Right, and then let's add some edge loops, some supporting edge loops, so we can actually sculpt this a bit better. All right, we go to sculpt mode. And let's sculpt this entire bunch of hairs a little bit more to the inside. And let's just make sure that if we go into solid view, that because we added edge loops, sometimes it also assigns these to be our start points, as you can see. Remove everything and just select your start points again and assign them. There we go, that's a lot better. And then we can just sculpt everything. Are we working with a mirror? Yes, a mirror in the symmetry here. We turn it off. And then let's just shape this. All right, shape it so everything blends together beautifully. It's all a matter of blending your geometry, which is a lot of fun to just play around with, I suppose. Like that. Like this. Maybe this can be a bit closer. Let's see how this looks in rendered view as well. Alright, not fully there yet, so we can just move all of this in a tiny bit, like that. Maybe we can move this out a bit more as well. So everything goes a bit more into a random direction, pretty much, right? Like that. We can go back to our original mesh here. We can move this out a little bit more. Disable X symmetry. Something like that, and now it's starting to blend together a lot better already. Right, so we got some nice loose hairs there for the endpoints. That is starting to blend together. And then for this system here, we can still just tiny bit play around with how that looks as well. Like this. Beautiful. And let's move this out a little tiny bit. All right, something like this. You know, I think that looks quite decent. All right, some quite fun. That looks like a nice kind of intersection of these hairs. I like it. So that is pretty much how you could set up an intricate system like this hair, and then you would just finish this off by adding some of those golden plates, for example. We can just do circles and we can just extrude this down, for example, like this, you know, E, Alt, S, scale it up along the normals, rotate it so it's around our braid a bit better, like that. Let's see, in render view, did we align this properly? Slightly more like this, maybe. That, and I feel like we need to position this a bit better. Let's scale this entire part down a tiny bit. And let's add a little bit of a golden material here. It's not that easy. We just increase the metallicness, decrease the roughness a little bit. Set the right color. There we go. You would usually add a little bit of bump and stuff as well, maybe. But for now, I'm not gonna bother with that too much. How does it look? Maybe a little bit more. Maybe this can be a bit more in. Let's just shape this a bit more, maybe a bit longer as well. Kill it. Just play around with it a little bit, right? Something like this maybe. Something like there. That's looking fine, and then we could just duplicate this and add it here as well. Just like that. Maybe we need to scale it up a little bit, you know. Just have some fun with it. If you think your hair doesn't properly fit in there, just sculpt your hair to go in there, right? Because this is mesh based and we can do that in quite an easy way, right? Let's make it a bit thinner maybe. Beautiful. Then shape this to match it there as well. You know, just have a little bit of fun with it, right? And then we have one more, for example, here at the end. Beautiful. Amazing, cool, a lot smaller, obviously. And if you want your braids to really have some cool kind of specific endpoint, what you can do is just add another kind of mesh here at the end. Let's just select this to add a cursor there. Shift A, mesh. Let's go with... What should we do? What should we do? Maybe we go with a circle. Circle, and then we just rotate this to fit properly in here. There we go. And then we can just extrude this, you know. Extrude, scale, extrude, scale, extrude, rotate, extrude, rotate. Go a little bit crazy, you know. And then we can just maybe move some of these points in random directions. And there's actually a fun feature you can enable in proportional editing tool, which is the random one. And that will just move all your vertices in like a more of a random direction. And I think that could be fun for this final part. So let's just select this to be our starting point. And that's the material, that's not what I need. Here, vertex group, start, assign. And we can double click one of these endpoints here and hit end, assign, press A, 3, shift N. Even though it looks weird, it perhaps looks fine with the mesh to hair card. So let's hold shift, select this, Ctrl L, copy modifiers, and it shouldn't connect to our original hair sculpt. We can just turn that off, and which will mean it connects to nothing. And you can tell that it actually looks quite interesting the way we set this up. All right, so that's actually a lot better in terms of how this looks and compared to, for example, the other ends there. And the randomness here actually adds quite a lot. We can even go to sculpt mode and, you know, sculpt this if we are not happy yet. And just sculpt everything nicely. Test out which quantity works best for your hairs, how many you need. You can even just decrease the width a little bit to really start playing around with your hairs a bit better. And maybe we don't need a fuzz layer here. And one is fine. We add a bit more width maybe. Let's see, you know. Let's just go a little nuts. Why not? Okay. I'm just going to keep changing this until I like it. I suppose. Let's add a bit more loose hairs as well. 15 maybe. Let's see how that looks actually. Maybe we have to apply our scaling first. Yes, there we go. Now we have some more loose hairs as well. Add some more strength here. So this really is going to look like more of a chaotic type of braid maybe. You can even set this to 25 and add even more offset. Something like that. Right, maybe it's too large in general. You can even rotate this a tiny bit. Like that, you know, be free. Maybe it's too large still. Like that. Make sure to apply your scaling and let's decrease the strength of the offset a little bit. Here, let's play around with the hair quantity multiplier as well. Maybe 1 works. And then we can also play around with the texture in the X direction a little bit, right? Because the larger you make your, or sorry, the less width your hair cards will have, the, how I'm going to say this, the more compressed your textures will be, right? If I set this to 1, it will be quite compressed. But if I lower my texture X scale, it's actually going to look a lot more like the actual hair strands, as you can tell probably by now, right? And that's looking a lot better already as well. Cool, and we can actually do the same texture trick here if it's too stretched out. What we can do is just lower the X scale as well. Here we go, into something a bit more natural. Same thing here, we can just copy the modifier. Obviously, it will add the same settings. Same thing for this one. Copy modifiers, and maybe we can even do it for this one here. Let's see, change the texture scale X. All right, so now it's quite big. A little bit more like that, maybe. Yeah. That's looking quite interesting, right? Let's blend this a little bit more together though. And more like at the front, like this. Great. And let's move this up a little bit more. So our actual front part looks a bit better. Something like this. Right. This one as well, a bit more up. Right, and then we are already quite decent, I would say. Let's copy this as well to there. Nice. Right. Interesting, quite cool, beautiful kind of setup. And maybe for these braids we can also change the X texture, right? Because this really stretches as we have the very long kind of cards. So we just change this to a much lower value, right? A lot closer to 0. Maybe something like this, perhaps. You can tell we get a little bit of dark values, and that's from the depth map in our actual shader, which shows that some strands are a bit deeper into the geometry, even though they are all at the same height, obviously. Something like that. Okay. Looks interesting. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, subscribe. I would enjoy any one of these, and let me know what you think. Cheers.